Good evening. Welcome back to another Facebook conversation in our Dementia Support Group for Caregivers with Bill Cohen. I am delighted, as Teddy Roosevelt used to say, to have Lili Fiore with me tonight. And I want to tell you a little bit about it, but first, welcome. Thanks for joining
Thank you so
me.
much. Thank you for having me.
Great. So let's tell you a little bit about Lili, and then we'll take it from there. So, in her 40s, Lili found herself in the difficult situation that occurs in many people's lives, dealing with aging family members, raising kids, managing her career, her marriage, her busy husband, and being involved with all the activities for her daughter and stepson so she could fit in. Settling, she got a call that her beloved aunt, who lived many states away, was not well. Faced with managing her aunt's care from afar and between in-person visits, Lili spoke to many professional people on how to manage and handle everything in her aunt's life until she got better. Everyone had their own opinion. We could talk about that one. And many also had their own agendas that had nothing to do with what was best for her aunt. Eventually, Lili found her way and then was also faced with her aging parents as well. Can't imagine. Lili realized that there was so many lessons she had learned from caring for her family that would help others in similar situations. It would be wrong not to do something with the knowledge she gained. Here, you're preaching to the choir. And
Indeed.
I think I just closed it. There we go. I'm back. Um, So Lili fine-tuned all the systems and spreadsheets she created and wrote up all the lessons learned and all the wisdom gained from all the missteps, because we all certainly make those, right? It also includes a lot of knowledge on death and dying that Lili gained from her father, Reverend Udell, and I am saying that right,
Yes,
Udell,
Reverend Udell.
who was one of the early teachers of death and dying in the state of Vermont back in the 1970s, my other favorite state besides Oregon. Lili got her certification as an end-of-life doula from the program at UVM, University of Vermont, to solidify everything she had learned from her experience as a caregiver and the wisdom from her dad. Lili wrote her book, Lili's Caregiver Guide, to be the resource she couldn't find when her world was imploding, in hopes that it helps you in your journey as a caregiver or as someone who wants to know more about caregiving or creating a good death for their loved ones. And I will say it for you, congratulations on becoming a certified dementia practitioner.
Thank you. I'm very excited about this.
So, besides that, tell me and our listeners, whether it's live or later, who is Lili? Tell us a little bit about
Lili,
yourself besides what I just read. Who are
yeah,
you?
well, Lili grew up being a caretaker. I grew up with my grandmother that lived out of state. I would drive as soon as I got my license and see her on the weekends and visit her in the nursing home, cut her toenails, make sure that her nightgowns didn't need repair, that kind of thing. After my grandfather died and she moved into the assisted living part because I was too young to drive before my grandfather died.
Mm.
Um, and then my mom's mom, when she got ill out in Chicago, I at 15 years old talked her into sending me out there because my mom had unfortunately been diagnosed with an incurable blood disease, and we didn't know what was going on with her. So I said, let me come out and help you. And so I did. And I learned so much. And she was not in good shape. She turned out she had some kind of neuromuscular disease. So we ended up bringing her back to Vermont. Um, and so that was great. Uh, but I've just learned a lot over the years. I've always cared about people. I've always just loved people. It's just like breathing to me. And growing up with a father who was an Episcopal priest and whose parishioners were really everybody at the hospital, he didn't have a church. I grew up being acutely aware of other people's needs. So Christmas morning, we were allowed to open our stockings, but dad worked on Christmas because guess what? People who are still in the hospital and haven't been discharged are not well, and they're having one of the worst days of their lives and worst Christmases of their lives or their families' lives. And how dare I be selfish and want to open my presents as a child when somebody needs my dad? And if somebody, there was one time, I remember when somebody's husband did not wake up and had a stroke and then died on Christmas Day. And my dad spent the whole day with that family and didn't get home till night. And that was just the way it was. So I just sort of was raised with this awareness, this very acute awareness of other people's pain. And it's just been inside of me. And I thought, you know, I really have always been good with death because my dad taught death and dying at the med school. And I've always read tons about metaphysical things. And my dad used to have people, his patients, after they died, many of them would come back and visit him, which was so amazing, and tell him stories,
Mhm. Can I ask a quick question? How about
always.
how about Kluber Ross?
Oh, he knew her. My father worked with her.
I'm not surprised.
And Cicely Saunders, who started hospice. Um, Wonderful, wonderful, amazing people. And and my dad was always going to write a book on death and dying. And he also taught clinical pastoral education, which is what any organized religion, nun or monk must have, I think, 4 credits of 4 units of CPE prior to being allowed to work with the public, because it's to make sure that you can hold your act together when you're dealing with a family who just lost their kids because they got hit crossing the street, right? If you don't have your own feelings of death together and aren't firmly rooted in some belief system, you end up sitting there, you would sit there and cry with this poor family who is experiencing the worst possible loss of their lives. So I just was raised with all those things. And and uh and I knew that I could create a good death for my aunt, then my dad, then my mom, and because of everything my father had taught me. And one of the coolest things that happened was my aunt had dementia, Parkinson's dementia, and she was a Ladybug fan. You can see the Ladybug sign behind me that was hers. And when I moved her from Chicago to Vermont, I said, Esther, what color curtains do you want? And she said with this huge smile, Ladybug red. And my dad was blind from glaucoma for the last 30 years. And so I worked really hard in figuring out which of his senses worked well. And obviously, Esther had made me very aware that visual was very important to her. And so I developed, when I was starting to write the book, what I call my sensory care method, which is what I did with my family. And that is, most people don't get evaluated to see, oh, can you still feel up here, grandma? Or is that tennis shoulder acting up and you've got neuropathy there? And so if I rub your shoulder to let you know I love you, you're not going to feel it. And so I have this sensory care assessment first that goes through all of your, do you have spiders in your vision? Do you have floaters because of vitreous detachments? Do you have peripheral, vision because no one's picked up that you've got macular degeneration? All these things. And then once you figure out what still works, then you go through each sense and write about what the preferences are. So there's hundreds of questions. Do you like listening to sports? Do you like listening to baseball? Do you prefer opera? And what smells can you still smell and still like, so that you can surround people with things that make them feel loved, make them feel secure, things they love to eat versus just average. Because very often, not always, but very often, we have trouble keeping weight on people that are not well.
Mhm.
And so that's, a really great way of trying to figure it out. And even if they're not verbal, you can still grab a couple family members or friends and go through the questionnaire and ask and say, hey, do you remember, did mom like this better than that? And so what you end up doing is you end up figuring out all the different things that make your loved one feel secure for their 5 senses. And then you can really make a big difference in their level of security, their level of comfort, and their ability to relax a little bit into their environment. Even if it's not home, they're going to say, oh, it's pink and I love pink and I'm so happy. So it's kind of like, if you think back to when if you had children or nieces or nephews, we would always decorate their rooms based on their preferences. But we don't do that in nursing homes very much. We just throw up a landscape, throw up a cute doggy picture, maybe a couple family pictures. But if they've got dementia, they may not recognize those people, right? So it's important to find the old pictures of family when they were younger. Um, and use
I
that.
love when places have, you know, the
The
mantle
50s.
outside the door or the window box. Some places do a whole thing on the door, which is
Yes.
great, which look like their own home. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
things. You were talking about senses. I mean, senses change, taste, smell,
Well,
everything
that's
else.
it.
And my mom
It's
was certainly an example of that. And I always tell a story about I years ago I got her recipes when I went up to college. I wanted to eat in the manner which I'm accustomed.
absolutely. She
Yes,
was
and
phenomenal cook, you told
she
me.
was. Well, she learned from like Joy of Cooking, Julia Child, New York Times, and my
Yes.
father's mother. But years later, I would say, Mom, I made your dish, blah, 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 blah. And she said, Did you put garlic in it? Yes, of course. She said, Then it's not my dish. She had forgotten that she cooked with it and she didn't
Yeah.
like it anymore, or she had an aversion. It's crazy. So
It's
the
crazy.
real end of the story, though, was after she passed away, we had a celebration of life at the house, immediate family. I made three dishes that she used to make. And afterwards, my brother says, Bill, you nailed it. Because
Oh, that's the
you would
best
know.
possible
That was my
compliment.
validation. That was my vindication.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
But it was definitely an example of how
yeah.
taste and smell change.
Well, and the other thing that happens is, let's say you've got people that are like my grandparents. Anybody said, "Hey, Carlton, what do you want in your coffee?" For 50 plus years, Martha would answer, "Not Carlton." And maybe Carlton didn't want cream and sugar in his coffee anymore, right? But he'd never had the opportunity to let anybody know. So, unless he was out without my grandmother. But if she was there, she would dictate what he liked, what he didn't like without checking with him.
So I have, like many people, and some of our listeners probably have seen videos or actually seen Teepa Snow in
She's
person.
amazing.
And she is. And one of her disciples, shall we say, here in Portland at our Alzheimer's conference last fall was talking about some of the things you can do, like feeling, pushing, leaning, that type of thing, to see what kind of response you get. Is there pain? Is there some kind of hesitation to get a feel? Because if they can't tell you, how else are you going to find out where they're hurting or where they have some
Absolutely.
limitations? So, how does what you're talking about differ from what Teepa talks about, or is there an incorporation, shall we say?
I'm sure there's an incorporation, right? Because it's still the same human body, it's still the same mind, the heart. It's what I'm trying to do is access things from different periods of their life that make them feel comfortable. So if they're in a hospital and they were a Red Sox fan and they have dementia, you better be sure I'm putting on the World Series game where they won,
Mm-hmm.
and let them
Mm-hmm.
just hear it again and again and again because it's going to bring them joy. And if I'm really lucky, it's going to tap into the joy that they had when it actually happened how
Mm-hmm.
many years ago.
But not a
Um,
Yankee game.
Not a Yankee game, but that's a Red Sox fan. I grew up in Vermont, so
Likewise.
although although I had, one kid that was a Yankees fan, the other two were Red Sox. So
Right.
what are you going to do?
Yeah, that well, growing up in Hartford, that was the rule.
Right.
Everybody was schizo.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell us a
Um,
little bit more. Anything else you'd like to add about your own caregiving journey besides what I read and what you've been talking about,
yeah, I just think
which
that
led you to becoming a caregiver and inspiration for others?
I really think that for me, I I was raised by a man who said my father's favorite saying was hospitals are yummy places. They help people. Most people, if you say hospitals are yummy places, they're going to think you're nuts and run in the other direction. But I grew up with that feeling. I've been anaphylactic, so that means my lungs shut. If I breathe the wrong thing, cinnamon, eat it, or mold, since I was in my 20s.
Mhm.
And so I've almost died like 6 times. I left my body once. Um, and well, I was waiting for the ambulance crew to get there.
Mhm.
and and I can tell you there's so much more. There's so much more. But I think it's important to look at death not as a bad thing or a sad thing. I think it's so important to get over our own feelings, take a deep breath, think about who's our loved one who's dying or dealing with dementia or dealing with an illness. What is going to bring them joy? One of the other things that I do is I make everybody who's a client of mine, everybody in the family take 10-minute Dr. Gary Chapman 5 love language quiz that's online. It doesn't take that much time. It gives you the percentages, so it's very statistical, mathematically sound. And guess what? Your love language can change. So I advise that people take it every 3 or 4 months. And if your loved one is nonverbal, again, get a group together and say, hey, do you think, remember mom liked gifts more than she liked spending time? Or was she huggy or not huggy? My mom and I fought for years, always. And yes, that happens a lot with mothers and daughters. And I never understood her completely. I never understood what it was that I was, cueing. And a friend gave me the 5 love languages book, and I read it in an afternoon, and I was like, oh my God, my mom's acts of service. And I'm words of affirmation or physical touch. So we're just doing this. And I immediately called her and told her and said, oh my God, mom, I'm so sorry. I think you need me to do ABC, and I've been doing EFG. And she's like, oh my God, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. We never fought again. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So I really think that it's very important to try to figure out what lights your loved ones up as
Mm-hmm.
far as their love language. Because if you don't feel loved and you're in an environment that is not comforting, you're going to be a grumpy person. You are not going to be happy. You are going to try to control whatever you can control. My mother was brilliant at it. Whenever we took her out to dinner, because my father wasn't well, she had lost her sister, she wasn't happy.
Mm-hmm.
Who can blame her? She would send every dinner she ever ordered back to the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Something was always wrong. Nothing was wrong, but it was the only thing in her life she could control.
Mm-hmm.
And so it gave her some feelings of validity and independence. So I say, let's not make somebody go to that extreme. Let's try to give them as many choices as we can.
Mm-hmm.
If they can't understand words because they've lost the ability for words, hold up the striped shirt, hold up the flower shirt, see which one they smile at.
Right.
Look at their body cues. If they can't tell you what they like anymore, what foods do they always eat?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If the plate's empty, put that on the, hey, mom loves this thing.
Yep.
And if the broccoli is there, who cares if they don't eat broccoli at 70 or 80 years old, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
like they needed to grow, you know. Um, and the other thing that I think I was very passionate about is both with my aunt, who had an intestinal blockage, and then they found out she had a huge pulmonary um, embolism, and so they couldn't fix her abdominal obstruction.
Mm-hmm.
So they told me she had a week to live, and she had dementia. But I don't know if I was me, my daughter who was named after her, or I was my mother, right? Because we all look alike. But it didn't matter. She knew she was loved. And I had to fight tooth and nail because I didn't think about getting hospice. I should have. The doctor should have told me this. I certainly knew about hospice since my father worked in
Mm-hmm.
Sicily, but I was a deer in headlights because here's my beloved aunt. I'm in my early 40s. I'm scared half to death, that I'm disappointing her, not doing something right. And I had trouble getting them. Her doctor was off, and the covering doctor didn't want to increase her morphine because he made some comment to the nurse, well, she might get addicted. And I was like, for crying out loud, she's going to be dead in a week. How can she get addicted?
Cares.
Who cares, right?
Right.
And then with my father, and I made them call the medical director because I could tell she was in pain. I made them call the medical director, who got me a doctor to give me the order for the morphine.
Mm-hmm.
I waged war. I was like, this is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's the one thing I can do for her? Make sure she
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have pain. So I highly recommend getting hospice involved as soon as possible.
That was
Even if
actually a good experience for us. And the last few weeks, I told the nurse, I said, all these other medications are not serving any purpose at this point.
no, that
I
she
want
should
to
be they
wean
should
off
be
them
stopped.
and increase the morphine so she won't be in pain, and I'll have what she's having.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
I needed it, but
But
I didn't take that. But
no, of course not. But it's really hard because even in nursing homes where people die all the time, people are still, some of them, if they're not trained in hospice, they're scared to give morphine.
Mhm.
So the morning of the day my father died, he was 6'3". He went from 180 or 90 pounds to 128. He couldn't see, he couldn't move, he could no longer swallow. And I finally, and the nurse at night wouldn't give him extra morphine because she said, "Oh, I've known your father for years. He's fine." I'm like, "He's not fine. His vital signs have doubled. He's got a furrowed brow. Yes, he's unconscious, so he can't complain. But for crying out loud, I know my father better than you do, ma'am, you know?" And so we called up the hospice team and said, "Okay, I need to engage you at 3 a.m." And the hospice nurse said, "Oh my God, this isn't nearly enough morphine to get your dad out of pain." And then the next morning, the nurse who had my father was not on top of it. And so I went into the break room and I said, "I don't know who the hell has my father, but you get off your ass and you go give my father his pain meds." And she did. And then
You have to advocate.
you have to advocate. Do not be afraid to advocate and yell. And then this
Hold them accountable, have them do their job.
Right. And absolutely. And this young woman, once she got to the bedside with my dad's morphine dose, she looked at me and she said, "You know, this could kill him." And I looked at her with a straight face. I said, "Oh, do you think he's going to get better?"
Mm-hmm.
Come on, lady.
Yeah.
Come on.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess
Training.
training. I really think the thing that's one of the biggest reasons why I decided to write the book and become a death doula is to make sure that nobody else's families experience, extra pain like mine did because of people that weren't trained. I mean, granted, it was 10 years ago. And when my mom died, I had morphine and I had a concierge doctor and she was at home. And so I called up and my brother, we did a conference call and my brother was medical power of attorney for our mom. I was financial. And I just said, "She's not okay." And so we did a conference call at 3 a.m. and the doctor changed the order and I was able to give her what she needed to keep her out of pain until she died. So if you don't like what your doctor's saying or your parents' doctor's saying, switch doctors. If your gut, I really believe when I taught for a little while, I taught catechism. And even though I'm Episcopalian, because we liked what they did for Sunday school better than what the Episcopal Church did. So we went there for a while. And I was a teacher. And so what I used to teach the kids when they were little, because it was in the middle of all the scandal in the Catholic Church, I said to the kids, "Trust your gut. God speaks to you through your gut. So if something ever makes you feel funny or weird or yucky, that's God telling you the situation isn't safe." And that is true for adults. If you feel that something's wrong with the doctor and the doctor is not listening to you or listening to your parent or your loved one, for crying out loud, get a second opinion. Insurance almost always will pay for a second opinion. Oh, I lost you.
Yep. That was on
There
mute.
we are.
I've got a cat down by my feet. I'm making sure she's quiet.
Oh, I love cats.
Yeah. And speaking of, I love Lucy. That's her name, Lucy.
Oh my God, that's so perfect.
Ginger, orange and white. And I also have one of those robotic orange cats, orange and white ginger cats, and her name is Arancia, which is orange in Italian. So
Yeah.
along the lines of love, is that why you chose the name Much Love Lili?
Oh, yes. Great question. So I'm very intuitive and I'm very spiritual because, of course, I grew up with my dad, right, who saw spirits and things like that. And in 2014, I wanted to start a blog. It was after my aunt died and my dad died about caregiving and grief. But then my mom got sick, and so I couldn't do much with it. But I really felt called and attracted to the name Much Love Lili. And I prayed about it and I thought about it, and it was like, no, that's what it should be called. And I kept the rights to the URL for 10 years or 8 years so that when I was ready, and I had no idea what it was going to be. I had no idea, but I knew when we first moved to North Carolina after my mom died that I just needed some time off. I needed time to grieve. I needed time to figure out, okay, my kids all grown up. My stepsons are all grown up. What's next for Lili? And and so that was great. And I kept thinking, I want to be a death doula. And my husband's like, well, I don't know, think about it seriously, because that's kind of a depressing thing. And I was like, yeah, that's true. And then COVID hit, and I had two friends in different states that called me up at the same day and said, hey, Lil, you would be the perfect death doula. There's this program at UVM. And I was like, okay, got it, get the hint. And I signed up for it. And then I thought, after I took the class and got my certification, I thought, no, I'm not supposed to be the person at the bedside. I'm supposed to teach people on a bigger scale how to do this, and how not to be afraid of death, and how not to be afraid of caregiving or dementia. And so I wrote a chapter, and then I wrote a chapter of forms. And then God poked me and said, no, you're not done. You're not done. And now I've got my 570 page, caregiving work. Oh, you can't see it because of the lighting, but book that you can get on Amazon, Walmart, or Barnes and Noble, and a bunch of other sites. And it's full of anything and everything I ever learned. And it's got everything you need from A to Z. And it starts off with caregiving, goes through the sensory care method, which I really have seen really does make a difference. So if you've got a grumpy person, it's because they're not feeling heard, and they're not feeling like they've got individuality. So give it to them, you know?
Mm-hmm. And we'll definitely put that in the comments and show notes so that people can.
Oh, thank you. You
Absolutely.
can go to muchlovelily.com and then just click book on the menu, and there's a link for all three
Yep.
of the major things.
So along the lines you're talking about, anything else you want caregivers to know or understand about caring for their loved one? What comes to mind?
Um,
What's your big top two or three tips?
well, one thing I've really noticed with caregivers is very often my clients are at the end of the rope when they come to me. And one of the biggest problems about caregiving is, let's say you have a perfect parent. Well, then it's not so bad. But let's say your parent wasn't a perfect parent, right? Let's say that you had a rough childhood, and now you've got to take care of this person who you have a lot of issues with. Or let's say they were great when you were a kid, but they didn't approve of the divorce you had, or they didn't approve of the fact that you came out of the closet and you're, gay or lesbian. And so now, but you're the one who's stuck legally taking care of this person. So I really think it's very, very, or the other one is, mom, I told you got to watch your blood sugar. I told you you're going to get into trouble with your diabetes and your cholesterol. And then they lose limbs or lose sight because they didn't maintain their diabetic regime. And so the sugar in their body damaged their organs irreversibly. And and so there's a lot of anger in that because it was preventative, right? It wasn't like, oh, I got hit by a bus by accident and I'm in trouble, or this cancer came out of nowhere. It was completely preventable, and they didn't do it. And now I got to clean up your mess. So, what I tell all of these people, because they have so much anger and frustration from years and years of not being able to express it, is I tell them to sit down in front of their laptop, open a document, and or if they prefer old fashioned paper and pen, that's fine too. And stream of consciousness, right? Everything you're thinking about that you would love to tell this person that you can't tell this person.
Mhm.
Get it off your chest. Tell them how pissed off you are, how angry you are, why, how frustrated you are. Or you can say, I feel betrayed by you because you weren't there for me, and now I have to be here for you. And this really sucks. Don't mince words. Do not worry about punctuation, sentence structure, paragraphs. Just let it out and keep it there in your drafts for a couple of days, or in your Google Docs is what I recommend. Um, and then sit with it for a little bit. Add more if you need to, and then go outside or to your kitchen sink, read it again, ask God or whoever your higher power is to help you process and release all these feelings, and then burn it in your fire pit. And just say, please take all these feelings away. And you will feel a lot better. And yes, you may need to do that 4 or 5 times over a year, because our emotions are in layers, right? So you pull out the top Kleenex and you're like, oh, thank God I got that off my chest. And then you're like, well, there was this time, and you think about it, and then you've got to get that out too. Or you were better to my sister than you were to me, or something, like that. So it's
Yes.
really important to
Yeah.
get all those feelings out. And then it makes caregiving much easier.
Mm-hmm. And that relates to what I tell a lot of caregivers to do is to journal.
Yes.
Two reasons: one, for your own peace of mind, mental health, etc., but also to document what's going on with your person with dementia, and you can share that with a physician because you don't get enough time in the doctor's office. That gives them a
No,
much
you don't.
picture of their behaviors, their symptoms, the issues that are going on there. And if they have any kind of geriatric training, which is who you should be seeing, not just your PCP who
Absolutely.
has very little,
Or
yeah.
family practice doctor who knows how to take care of kids as well as your 90-year-old grandmother. Not so
Mhm.
much.
Yeah,
Um, the other thing is my book is full of history forms, it's full of tracking forms,
exactly.
it's full of personal care forms. So you've got caregivers taking care, or if you're the caregiver and you can't remember when you last changed their sheets if they aren't having accident, you write all this stuff down. There's vital sign sheets, there's CPAP and VPAP cleaning sheets, everything you can think of, catheter check, fistula check if they are on dialysis, and vital signs. And I've got 3 different cognitive sheets, wrong words, sundowning, and then there's another one, so that you can have all the caregivers write this down when this happens. You know, when they said cake, did they actually mean toilet? You don't know depending on what's wrong. So I think it's really important. And there's a QR code at the back of my book, so you don't have to rip up the book or write in it. You can just download all the worksheets to your
Nice.
computer, and you can just print them out every time you need them, you know, share them with your family, whatever you need to do, so that you don't have to ruin the book.
I can see a lot of people benefiting from that. Yeah, especially
Yeah,
the aspect, yeah, share it with family, because if you can get everybody working at it, like, what are you observing? What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
that's
And
right.
let's compare notes, because you may be getting one story and the other may be getting different because, dear
Well,
mom
people,
can't remember
especially,
what she told everybody anyway.
well, that's true. And the other thing that happens with dementia is, I'm sure you have talked about many times, is that people will let their guard down with whoever it is they feel the most comfortable with, and the person that's going to love them, even if they scream, shout, or yell, to a certain extent. And so, I have many patients who are, grumpy, difficult, violent with their caregivers, but when they're with their family on this little short 1 hour visit, they appear like they don't have dementia because they hold it together for dear life, and they're able to fool everybody. My aunt Esther was brilliant. She was beautiful. She was brilliant. She could talk the Eskimos into buying ice. But when they gave her the neuropsych test and asked her to draw the clock, the circle was, over here. The arrows were down on the other part of the paper, and the numbers were all ones and zeros.
Bless her heart.
So, but you would never know it by talking to her. So please understand that even if your gut tells you that something's not right, even if you take, because I've heard 2 cases of this recently, and I know it's not a trend, but even if you bring your loved one to a neurologist, or your general practitioner tells you to bring them to a neurologist, and the neurologist tells you everything's fine, unless they've had cognitive psychological testing, the ones that take 3 to 4 hours, you don't know what's going on in that brain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you need to do. And they'll probably, if you ask for it, they'll give you the referral. And there's a lot of these places now, because there are so few neuropsychologists who administer neuropsych testing, cognitive testing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people that have gone out and hung up shingles that don't take insurance, that charge a lot of money to
Mm-hmm.
do the same testing.
Mm-hmm.
So if money's no object, then you can call up one of these concierge neuropsych places.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think that's really the key to understand what's going on. It's also the best benchmark I know for understanding what the decline is,
Mm-hmm.
what's going on. So
Mm-hmm. you mentioned neuropsychology, and it makes me think about a well-known author, Still Alice, Lisa Genova.
Oh my
I
God.
read her book, Remember, and I'm no scientist, but that is a fascinating book.
I'll have to read it.
I
I
just
don't.
screamed through it. That's the basic title, Remember. I mean, she has some
Okay.
other novels, but
Right,
this is
right.
really like a textbook about memory and things like that. And some of the things she talked about were very salient, like the fact that the reason why those tests are so hard in most cases is it's based upon short-term memory.
Yes.
And what she talks about, is don't worry about if you've lost the keys or the glasses, things
Mm-mm.
if you forget what they're for, of course, right?
Yeah, that would be a different problem.
That's a different problem. But also give yourself some grace. We all can't remember the name of that actor, or we go to the store and we forget an item or two. Make it easier on yourself. If you're not establishing some significance or writing it down or making a list, it's gone from your short-term memory like that.
Yeah,
And she also says, yeah, to remember a name of something like a title of a movie, Google, use it. It's free.
absolutely. And AI can help you with that. And I'm not an AI advocate by any means,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, AI, Google Chat, what's the name of the movie with it had Brad Pitt and this person in it that was about a war, World War II
Mm-hmm.
or something, and then it'll give you the possibilities. So make it work for you. That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I'm in a clinical study at our local teaching hospital, Oregon Health Sciences University, not because I have a problem, but I was the son of a woman who had Alzheimer's.
Right.
I'm a, subject to add to the research. And when I went through that whole battery of tests, including the memory tests, I was worried. And they said, don't worry, you're fine. You're clinically normal. I passed the audition. Yes. They
Right.
said, yeah, but those are really hard. So I had to
Yeah.
give myself some grace too.
Absolutely. Well, my daughter's almost in her fourth year of becoming a neuropsychologist. So she
Mhm.
did all those tests on all of us, part of her training in her first year. And it was fun. It
Yeah.
was fun.
So when you talk about your book and sensory care method and everything else, what's the thing that people, one, I guess two ways, what
Hmm.
is they ask you the most, like an FAQ, or that they find is the most beneficial?
I think the thing that happens the most is that most caregivers don't take care of themselves because they feel that there's no time. So between the emotions that they're feeling, and emotions take time and space to process. And anybody that doesn't believe that, think about how tired you are if you have a fight with somebody, right? You're exhausted, you want to sleep, or you don't sleep well because you're upset. So your whole body is picking up all those things every time you see your beloved mom or dad or aunt or uncle who's not acting like themselves. I mean, or who's very sick and suffering. That's not easy. So it is incredibly important to understand what your own love language is, to let your kids and your friends say, no, hey, my love language is receiving gifts. So if you run across something at a garage sale that you think I like, please, I could use a pick me up. Or if you see flowers on sale because they're falling apart at the grocery store and they can't sell them anymore, get them for me. I'll cut
Mhm.
up the stems, put them in water, and you put aspirin in there to revive them.
Okay. I wasn't going to say anything until the end, but you're talking about the love language. I just saw this on Instagram. Boston.com has a page there. I don't know if you follow anything like that, but
No.
they did for Valentine's Day the five love languages of Boston. And
Oh, I love it.
and I'm going to send it to you. I did screenshots, but one of the under uh, acts of giving, it was that you bring somebody their Dunkin' drink, Dunkin' Donuts, without
Absolutely.
even asking what they want.
You know,
That
that's
how's
true.
that? Which goes back to people want to help. And I've told this story many times, so anybody's heard this before. I don't know if you have. Uh, that sometimes you just have to ask. People
Yes.
say, "How can I help? How can I help?" But they don't know. The last couple of weeks when mom was on hospice, there was a norovirus quarantine.
Right.
My aunt and I are taking turns going to see mom. They allowed me and my aunt to go in and see her because they knew she was close. And the care was exceptional. The coffee was institutional. I got on social media one morning, as I think it was like only 2 days before, and I said, could somebody please bring me a mocha? Two different friends from two different coffee stands showed up at the front desk at the care facility. And I
I
bring
love
this
it.
up all the time, and I thank them regularly because who else would do that? I mean, that's what friends are
Right.
for. That's what they do. They don't hide,
Absolutely.
don't run
Make
away.
social media work for us.
Right. I mean, it's even like as simple as, okay, if you go to somebody's house or to the care facility, who goes empty-handed? What culture doesn't say, bring a casserole, bring a dish, bring something,
Absolutely.
bring a cinnabon. I don't care.
Right. Just bring, don't come empty handed.
Right, or a mocha coffee. Right.
Or a mocha coffee. I can tell you that I have solved the problem of people wanting to help and not knowing what to do.
Mm-hmm.
In my book, in my book, the chapter immediately after death, I have a list, like 3 pages of things that need to be done and taken care of after your loved one dies. And each of them is in a bullet. And underneath each bullet, there's a place for name, phone number, email.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have 2 or 3 pages for the day of the service so that you can make sure that someone's going to go get Mrs. Smith, who lives down the road, who wants to be at your mom's service but no longer drives. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so when people say to you, "Oh, I don't know what I can do, call me," you say, "Oh no, here's a sheet. Why don't you pick something?"
Mm-hmm.
And so
Right.
then you don't have to think about it because you're in grief and you're overwhelmed and exhausted, and they don't have to feel badly. They can pick what they want to do, which
Or
means
before
they'll be more likely to do it.
or before that, during the caregiving years, if think about all the different hats and jobs that you have as a caregiver, the finance person, the launderer, the cook, the nurse, you name it, uh, list all those things out and all the different tasks that you do. And when somebody, hey, how can I help? You've got a list right there ready to go. A couple of examples I talk about it. We can go pick up prescriptions at the pharmacy. Or, you have a son who has got a lawnmower. I've seen him out in the neighborhood. Can you mow my lawn? No.
Absolutely.
Who's going to say
I have
no?
that
Who's going to
in
say
the
no?
nobody. In the beginning of my book, in the caregiving chapter, I think it's that one, or maybe it's in the self-care chapter. I have a quiz on caregiving triggers. So you can identify what it is, like you were saying, that just makes your skin crawl the most. And then you find a volunteer at church, at your local club, your VFW, all that you scroll around, you find, like you said, the kid in the neighborhood who wants to cut the lawn, and you farm out the jobs you can't stand to do.
Mhm.
And if you hate giving your loved one a shower because you're being close to them and seeing them in an intimate state and it makes you uncomfortable, that's when you try to hire a caregiver to come
Right.
once or twice a week and shower your parent or your loved one and
And they
and
probably
take
don't
care of
need
that.
any more than that anyway. They're not out there, playing tennis,
Oh, they're
right?
not playing tennis. They don't need more than that.
No,
So there are workarounds. We just have to get creative, right?
exactly.
We just have to get creative.
Hmm. And that's one
And
or two things that are now off your plate that you don't have to worry about.
absolutely.
You've got enough.
Abs Well, the thing is with things that you hate to do, and when there's something that's coming up that we know that we don't like, we have a tendency to keep thinking about it and going, "Oh God, I've got to do that today. I really don't want to do that today."
Hmm.
So if we can get rid of that task and farm it out,
Hmm.
then you've got all that emotional energy and psychological energy to go read a book for 10 minutes, to play a game on your phone, to talk to a friend, call your adult kid,
Hmm.
doing something other than trying to get up your stamina so that you can deal with this unpleasant thing that you don't want to deal with. And I don't care if you don't like, if if cleaning the toilets really bothers you, that's okay.
Hmm.
Honor your phobias or your
Hmm.
dislikes. Honor them. Don't feel badly because you don't like to do something. You are who you are. Honor it.
And it might be something with with medical forms or billings or claims or what have you, and you've got somebody in the family who has a financial background, accounting, what have you, and they like doing that, that's a
Let them do
off
it.
your plate, right? So
Just,
I
I
think
will
it's
say,
in terms of going back to the,
under no,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to just say, under no circumstances should you ever give anybody your checkbook, your loved one's checkbook, have them have access to those things, see any credit card numbers, or have any access to legal documents.
Mhm.
I don't care how much you love them. I don't care how much you trust them. Just don't go there.
Got to keep
Just
them.
don't go there.
Exactly. But going to the self-care, I talk about this Savvy Caregiver class out of Emory University, and they have this exercise where, because it's so important, because if people don't do things like this, they are going to burn out, get sick, or worse.
Absolutely.
And it's the idea, well, you can either do a fairy godmother, three wishes, or the genie out of the bottle.
Oh,
But
I love it.
so the idea is that if you had 2 hours, 4 hours to yourself, no caregiving responsibilities, or a whole day, or a weekend, three wishes, what would you do with that time? And the
That's
idea is that
fabulous.
if you think about some things that you might want to do, whether it's meeting friends for lunch or getting a massage or going to sleep at a hotel over a weekend, whatever, you may find a way to make that happen. You know, I need that. I'm going to burn out. I'm going to get sick. And I need that time. And whether it's bringing in a caregiver or a friend or a family member for that respite.
Respite care.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so important. Yeah.
it's incredibly
You have to
important.
ask. You have to, it's mandatory.
It
Self-care
is.
isn't selfish, it's vital.
It's vital. And let me remind everybody that depending on the circumstances, the statistics are that 20 to 60% of people who are caregivers will die before the person they're caring for.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells you how important it is to get support, because that 60% is really talking about people that are just there by themselves taking care of their loved one with no support.
And I can give it more specific when it comes to dementia.
Ooh, good.
And that is for 70 years of age or older, caring for a loved one with dementia, two-thirds predecease the person they're caring for.
That's
And
pretty
that's not
frightening.
only tragic, but it's preventable,
It's absolutely preventable.
because if they get their own health care taken care of, they get their breaks, get their respite, that is preventable, because they're not doing themselves or their loved one any good by getting sick themselves.
No. And I will say some of the best situations I've heard about, one of my dear friends here, Mary, she has siblings. And when their parents were not well, they had a deal. They rotated. Each sibling had to take a week, and they would fly or drive, and they would take care of the parents for that week. So so if you can get your siblings to share in the joy, so to speak, or in the
Mhm.
duties, do it. But the other thing is, I want to make it very clear. If if you have somebody in your family that you are estranged from, or your parent is estranged from, do not let that stop you from reaching out to these people and giving them the opportunity. And there's a place in my book where I say to the person, for you to ask your loved one,
Mhm.
is there any unfinished business you have? Is there someone you need to contact? Do you need to, would you like to see them? Would you like to talk to them? Would you like to write to them? Would you like to do a video?
Mhm.
You know, assuming they have some faculties left. It
Mhm.
is really important you do that. And the other
Closure.
thing that
Closure.
yeah, it's closure.
Mhm.
And I don't like the idea of somebody dying and having one of their kids not come and have that opportunity. So if you and your siblings don't talk, send an email out to everybody or call them up and say, hey, we're doing a truce, we're doing a ceasefire
Mhm.
while mom's in this situation. Please come, and all of you agree to shut the heck up,
Mhm.
not yell at each other,
Mhm.
that any kind of family relationship stuff in front of mom is off the table,
About her
and that you're
welfare.
all,
Mhm.
yeah, because mom doesn't need to see that. She doesn't want to see her beloved kids yelling. And one of the best things you could do for her on her way out is to let her see you're all together.
Mhm.
And if you start getting mad at a family member, walk out of the room, take a walk. Say
Mm-hmm.
you'll be back in 15 minutes. Don't respond. And if somebody starts saying stupid things, remember when someone's dying or someone has dementia and they're stressed, especially if they've been estranged, this is a lot to deal with. So give everybody a break.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get upset with them. Just be understanding, you know?
Empathy.
Just be understanding
Mm-hmm.
and take a step back.
Yeah.
Take a step back.
And by the way, at a minimum for family members like that, at least keep them in the loop.
Absolutely.
Even if they're not helping, they can't say that they didn't know what was going on. They had the
Absolutely. Yeah.
and
And don't
and that's what gets into my one of my pieces of advice. I usually tell people with the unsolicited advice and that especially when it's misdirected, misinformed, or not in the best interests of the loved ones, is that you can say two things. One is, all right, that's a good idea. Why don't you take that on? You're going to get one of two responses. One, either they're going to shut up, that's good, or two, they'll do it.
right.
So it's a win-win either way. The
That's
other
phenomenal.
The other is, especially if it's ill-informed, is that's an interesting idea. I'll consider it and then ignore it.
Right.
You have my
Absolutely.
blessing on that one.
I think that's really important.
Mhm.
And everybody had and the other thing that I really think is important is don't waste any time getting mad at your sister or your brother who isn't willing to step in the way you're stepping in as a caregiver. You have to remember that everybody has their own way of dealing with things, and just because they can't deal with it and don't
Mhm.
want to be on the front lines does not mean they don't love you. It does not mean they don't love your parent.
Mhm.
You
That's
really
their
have to remember that.
Yep, that's their issues, isn't it?
It is, but
Mhm.
it feels like your issue because you want the help. But
Mhm.
if they can't be there, then ask if they can help fund a caregiver so you can take a couple days off, or fund a caregiver every morning. You know, if the subs can get together and do that, or the other family can do that, so that you can go out and do grocery shopping and whatever, you know, and have a break.
I was fortunate that my mom's younger sisters, hard to say younger when one is turning 87, the other one I think is going to be 91 or 92. But again, we were talking about 11 plus years ago, that they had a lot of opinions, but
Yes,
they were always in my mom's best interests. And they knew that I would listen and that I had her
right.
best interest in mind, but I had the final decision because I was the power of attorney.
Yeah, yeah. I have a
But
I did a social media post, I think it was last week, that said if you come into a caregiving situation with your loved one and somebody else has been taking the lead, do not say anything for a couple of weeks. Give them the courtesy for understanding that they know what they've been doing. And if you have some ideas, wait a while, then ask, hey, what do you think about this? And make sure that you validate what a wonderful job they've been doing by putting their lives aside to take care of your loved one, your mutual loved one.
exactly. And I was just had an earlier call today, new client, and she was talking about with her uncle and his wife and her own brother regarding care of her mother, and that they were kind of like taking turns and deciding where she's going to end up. I said, bravo, and pat yourself on the back to the fact that you are all talking and you're trying to do what's in your mom's best interest and collaborate. Maybe haven't made the final decisions yet, but you're working on it and you're being proactive, not kicking the can down the road. Mom's fine, that type of thing.
Absolutely.
Talk about it
That's,
and have a plan and a plan B and a plan C because things happen.
yeah, they really do. And they happen when you leave. And for gosh sakes, please make sure that you have legal documents, even if your loved ones already has, you know, documented dementia.
Mhm.
Please get the court to appoint you. It doesn't take that much to become a guardian, legal guardian for your loved one, if you're especially if you're a relative. um, do that, get everything taken care of, because it is incredibly important.
Mhm.
The other thing, to make it clear to all of you, if your loved one does not have a signed do not resuscitate order by a doctor, if you call 911, that is giving them consent to revive your loved one.
Mm-hmm.
It does not matter if they have signed papers saying they want to be let go,
Mm-hmm.
because so make sure you understand that. Don't call 911 as they're dying if you don't want them to do that, unless you can hand them the paper signed by the doctor that
Mm-hmm.
says this person is not to be revived,
I was
because they don't have a choice.
I was very cognizant, and everybody has to make their own decisions, or their loved one has to. Mom gave me a gift right after the hurricane. We're in North Carolina, Wilmington, with step family,
Where
and
I live.
yep, and we were, and I was doing the advance directive with her. She still was cognizant of what was going on, and here's why a great example of it, that this was very much in the news at the time. This is in the mid 2000s. And I said to her when we're going through the questions, Mom, do you want to end up like Terry Schiavo,
Oh,
that woman who
yes.
was in a persistent
Had a
vegetative state
feeding,
for what,
right,
about
and had a feeding
years?
tube
Was it about 2 years or something
at
ridiculous?
least,
Yeah, the
because her
families were
family was
fighting,
fighting over taking out the
families were
feeding
fighting,
tube.
politicians getting involved, everything else. My
It
mom
was
very
horrible.
said to me, absolutely not.
Yes.
And that's what I put in writing. That's what drove her pulse to physician orders, later on. And as we got closer, everything went to no extraordinary measures, no antibiotics, no nothing, because that was her wishes. So we
Right.
made sure that was going to happen. And that, like I said, that was a gift. I didn't have to make any horrible
That's
decisions
fabulous.
about her care.
Well,
But
the
again, that's not what everybody wants. My stepfather, who was a
mhm,
doctor, wanted all possible measures taken. He was the complete opposite, and he lived way too long,
right.
with no quality of life.
Yeah. So remember, folks, sometimes, and I have no idea if this is true for him or not, but people who are afraid of death and afraid they may not be going to the upstairs, but they may be going downstairs, are far more likely to want to have all the extraordinary measures.
Mm.
Um, I want you to understand that if somebody says they want CPR, the odds are they're going to have broken ribs, especially if they're older. They're going to have bruising. They're going to hurt.
Mm.
Um, if you want them to be intubated, you know, you've got to understand that each step of trying to revive your loved one brings with it a whole mess, a whole list of other things. I actually am working with a woman who's a traveling nurse and has been a traveling nurse for years. She has been rewriting a living will so that it explains, yes, I want to be intubated. I want to be put on a respirator. And I understand and accept that that means that all these other things are going to be done to my body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So that because people don't understand, they don't know unless they've got a medical background.
exactly. Well, this has been fantastic. I don't know how we could go beyond this, but uh, well, again, we'll have all the contact things and the notes,
Thank
links,
you.
etc. But what's the primary one you want people to know?
Much love, Lili. And Lili spelled Lili. And then you can just click on book and then you can see the links to my book.
Fantastic. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, wide
I love
ranging.
talking to you, Bill. You're
I hope
phenomenal.
people will find it helpful and informative.
And the only other thing I want to say is that you can work with me always. My first consult with you is free, and you can book a 30-minute appointment because I think it's really important that you know you can work with somebody before you start handing out money when there's not as much money when you've got a loved one that's not well.
Right.
So if you think I can help you, then I'm here for you
Mm-hmm.
24/7 if you want, you know.
Exactly. And I'm sure you know that I pretty much work the same way. Want to make sure it's a good
Absolutely.
fit. Good fit. All right.
Yes.
Well, thank you again and have a wonderful evening and hope you all enjoy this.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye-bye
Thank you
for
so much, Bill.
now.